Okay, we're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. So happy to have you all here this afternoon. Well, afternoon, depending on where you. I think it's afternoon for all of us, right? I think we're good to say afternoon. I'm so happy to have you all here. Thank you so much for honoring us with your time. I know that we're living in a very new and somewhat challenging time, depending on our circumstances. So the fact that you're here with us this afternoon and honoring us with your presence, we're so grateful for. I want to go ahead. My name is Africa Faney Mills, and I am your host for today's session. I'm going to start out by giving you some background information about the series. I'll tell you a bit about some logistics for our session today. I'll talk to you a bit about the description for the session, and then I'll pass it on to our panelists for today. So I want to welcome you to the CAAASA UCLA CCEE Advancing Equity in an Era of Crisis webinar series. The California Association of African American Superintendents and Administrators, or CAAASA, and the University of California, Los Angeles Center for the Transformation of Schools put this project together to support equity in virtual learning as we all shelter in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19. This work has been made possible by the generous support of the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, or CCEE. We're grateful for their partnership on behalf of California's K-12 public school students. At the end of our session today, I'm going to ask you to complete a survey to evaluate our time together. We greatly appreciate it if you would give us your feedback so we can make sure to continue making sure that the series meets your needs. And if you are watching this recording later on, please, you have access to the survey as well, so please give your feedback even if you're watching the recording. I will also be sharing a website with you at the end of the session, in addition to the survey, that provides access to where the slide deck will be post-session, and also where you can ask additional questions that you may not have answered during today's session. There's a follow-up questions tab that you'll have access to on that website. And so just want to talk to you a bit about today's session. So let me go ahead and let you know about today's session is system design. How do we ensure that we serve children who have been historically disadvantaged? Before we can ensure that our education system serves children who have been historically disadvantaged, we must understand how inequity became baked into our social and education system. By understanding historic inequities and examining those which are still present in our own schools and classrooms, we can take specific steps to interrupt them and apply strategies to serve these students. It's not the students who are deficient, rather our schools and classrooms. It's our system. So the outcomes of today's session is that we want to make sure that participants will examine, the U.S. participants will examine.
Excuse me, Africa.
Yep.
Yeah. So we'll get into that part, but actually you're reading the description from next week. So they have a preview now of next week. This week we're talking about understanding unconscious bias and combating social conditioning.
I am so sorry. Okay, so this is okay. Let me go ahead and I'm going to pass it over to you to give the description of the session. I'm so sorry for that, and I hope that you all appreciate the preview.
No problem.
To describe today's session and to go ahead and give the bio and the background to yourselves. I am so sorry. I apologize for that.
Not a problem. There's not a good movie without a good trailer. So I appreciate you setting this up for next week.
Coming attractions.
There you go. Exactly.
Okay.
So welcome everyone to our second week in our series of equity seminars. Today we'll be discussing unconscious bias and microaggressions. Once again, my name is Lybroan James. I'm the Chief Educational Officer for STEMulate Learning. I'm a former high school math teacher of 15 years and also worked as a national presenter and instructional designer. And I'd now like to introduce my partner, Ann Watkins, who will be conducting the seminar along with me.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ann Watkins. I started my teaching career in Oakland, at Oakland High, where I taught English. Then moved down to Santa Cruz, and I worked at the University of California, Santa Cruz with student teachers for a number of years. Currently I'm working with the New Teacher Center, which is a nonprofit that supports, nationally supports districts around induction. But I also am doing some consulting, particularly with the Santa Cruz County Alternative Education Department and just very honored and grateful to be working with my colleague and friend Lybroan to offer this equity series.
Thank you so much, Anne. And so now that everyone knows who we are, we need to know a little bit of information about the people who are attending. So we're going to put a poll and launch a poll. And if you could let us know who was in the room today, whether you're a teacher, paraeducator, administrator, parent, or other. Thank you very much. I know the routine. I appreciate it. Great. So, and Anna and I like to use this information to really inform the way we present and how we make adjustments on the fly to meet everybody's needs as best as possible.
And also, I wanted to thank you all for the feedback you gave us last time, because that also really informs the work that Lybroan and I do in putting these together. So thanks for that.
Most definitely. Okay. So we got about, we'll give just about another 10 seconds for people. We have about 83% of the people who have replied already. So we're going to give about another 10 seconds. All righty, fantastic. And now we'll go ahead and share the poll. So we have an even split between teachers, some administrators, and others. So we'd be interested to know, maybe even in the chat, who are the others? Are they consultants or other people on different levels of education? So we can share that in the chat. That would be very much appreciated. All righty, so we have one more poll we'd like to ask you about here. We launched this poll. So now if you can share with us that what is your comfort or knowledge level of unconscious bias and microaggressions? So we want to know how deep we can go, or do we keep it at the shallow end of the pool, or do we dive into the deep end today? Okay, we're almost 75%, okay. 80%, we'll give a few more people, a few more seconds to go ahead and answer the poll. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, so the majority of people, 51%, are somewhat familiar. Okay, so that helps quite a bit. And a few people, 16 people, first time engaging this topic. So put on your seatbelt, get ready for a nice little ride, and me and Ann gonna take you on a nice little journey through unconscious bias and microaggressions.
All right.
All right.
And so just one thing I wanted to share before we start with our outcomes for this time is this morning I was reading a note from the Wall Street Journal, and the headline is, "Some school districts plan to end the year early, call remote learning too tough." And the sub-headline is, "Georgia and other states waive minimum instruction time requirements during the pandemic." And I want you to keep that in mind as you think about this notion of unconscious bias and the effects that it has on students. So I'll let Lybroan give us the overview for today.
Okay, so the outcomes we have for today's session is really to understand the terms unconscious bias and microaggressions. Also to explore the effects of unconscious bias on students, parents, and disadvantaged communities. Also want to be able to identify what unconscious bias looks like and sounds like, especially in the field of education. And then lastly, we want to build skills and awareness to interrupt the impact of unconscious bias in the educational learning environment. So those are our outcomes for today. So we're going to go ahead and get it started.
All right, thank you. So just as a kind of general definition around unconscious, or sometimes the term is implicit biases, they are attitudes that affect our understanding, our actions and decisions unconsciously, that we're not even aware. I think it's important to remember that everyone has them and that they don't necessarily align with our declared beliefs. And the other thing I think that's really important is that we can change them and interrupt. So thinking about unconscious bias, where does it come from? And the next slide talks about how we learn the subtext of our culture's message early. And research finds that by age 5 years of age, most children have definite and entrenched stereotypes about Blacks, women, and other social groups. And children don't actually have a choice about accepting or rejecting these because they're acquired before they have the cognitive abilities or experiences to form their own beliefs. So these are how they are sort of hardwired. And no matter how progressive a parent might be, they have a lot to compete with. The forces that sort of perpetuate the biases. And we're all, I think, familiar with peer pressure, mass media, the actual balance of power in society. I think that those are some things to really remember as we go through this. We learn from our families and our friends. And I think the important thing to remember is that we all use stereotypes. We all have unconscious biases without knowing it. And I like this final one: we've met the enemy of equality, and the enemy is us.
Yes, and so following up on that, we have to understand the danger of unconscious bias in schools, because as Ann mentioned, we all have biases. But the difficult part or the challenge comes in when you have biases and you have power, and you can use your power to inflict your biases on other people, and that leads to discrimination and oppression, which happens a lot, especially in the school system. So just because we all have biases, okay, but if I'm a school leader or a principal, if I'm a teacher, I can then have the power to inflict my biases on students or the school community, and that's where we really have to be careful. So that's really what we want to focus on as those of us who have power in the educational system. How can we be aware of our biases and confront them and minimize those and minimize the impact of our biases on students?
And I think this next slide is really important for us to think about, particularly now, because we find that we default to our biases when we have to make quick decisions, we have incomplete information, or we're tired or stressed. And I think all of us can relate to these in terms of what's going on, particularly now as we're sheltering in place and we're trying to make decisions. That headline around ending school early, quick decision made in a time of stress, teachers stressed, trying to figure out how to move forward. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as we're going through today's session. And right now I'm going to pass it to Lybroan. He's going to share with us a conceptual frame that helps us to understand what biases and messages inform our biases and how can we address those.
Thank you, Ann. And so I really want to begin by talking about the ladder of inference. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with this, but I recommend that you Google the ladder of inference and do a little more research on this afterwards. But basically, human beings, we are meaning-making machines. We try to create meaning out of everything. And those meanings that we create are largely impacted by our biases that we get from society that are passed on, as Ann said. But the ladder of inference asks us to look at a situation and look at it as pure data. And before we climb up the ladder to assumptions and conclusions, we first want to look at the data, select what are we seeing, then make informed assumptions based on prior experiences, then draw conclusions, and then bring our beliefs in. But that's the difficult part, because typically our beliefs at the top of the ladder influence how we see the data. And so to give you some examples, I'll share on the next slide, but always remember, we want to stay low on the ladder of inference. So as you're dealing with students, parents, and others, and your biases start creeping into your mind, just remember the term, I want to stay low on the ladder of inference. I want to stay down to just observable data before I draw conclusions. So here is a news clipping. So here it's talking about 2 residents wade through the water during the Hurricane Katrina time. So if in this picture you see the people wading through the water, and we see circled on the screen here, it says in chest deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store. So compare that to this next slide here. Now you see an African-American person still in the water, just like the other person dealing with Katrina, but now they say this person is looting, not in their neighborhood, but they say that they're looting, and they're doing the same thing. And another thing I wanted to address in this, it says in the first sentence, a young man walks through. To me, that looks like a child. So another one of the impacts of unconscious bias is that people look at, especially African-American males, and they try to adultify children. So make us seem like we're adults, or that they're older than they are, which means they're more subject to more punishment and scrutiny. So where is this a child? So looking at the ladder of inference here, if I would do a quick exercise, I would ask you, what do you see? And if you stay low on the ladder of inference, you're saying, I see 2 people wading through water with objects in their hands. Just as I see the same thing here. I see another person wading through water with objects in their hands. So that is staying low on the ladder. Then you look at the context. Okay, this Katrina. So this is happening in Katrina. We know people are dealing with the floods. They're no longer at home, and so they're trying to survive. And so then we go on to our beliefs, rather than these articles, as you can see, which are very high up on the ladder and help to further ingrain negative biases. And these are a couple of media examples.
And so I think what we're focused on really importantly is how do our biases impact students of color in the schools that we serve, students of color and other students who may be marginalized. And here's an example of a finding that preschool teachers' implicit bias impacts Black boys most, study said. And it just strikes me, preschool? And already the biases are impacting these kids, and the impact that has not just on them at the present, but in the future is profound. And I also want to mention that it's not necessarily along socioeconomic lines, it's specifically along colored lines. And the next slide is another headline, I think, that's really important. People see Black men as larger and more threatening than same-size white men. And this again is an implicit bias that people aren't even conscious of necessarily. It kind of speaks to what Lybroan was talking about, the adultifying of Black children. And I remember my son, who is presents as Black, mentioned to me when he was walking as a teenager, he was like, Mom, people don't see me now as just a little kid. They see me as a threat, and cross to the other side of the road often when I'm walking. And Lybroan mentioned something similar with his kids.
Yes, it's, having to have that conversation early, like how do you interact with adults? How do you interact with the police? Because you understand these biases, and when they see you as an adult or larger, even if it's in their mind, this is the most dangerous place for a Black person to be, is in a white person's mind. That is a scary place to be, because they have unconscious biases that we all have, but we all have biases, but who has the power to enact theirs? So in terms of the school context, how do we see students? One of the challenges I always say in terms of bias is we have bias against students. I know I had biases as a teacher against students. So if I saw Asian students coming to my math class, I'm like, cool, I know y'all gonna get A's in my class. I ain't worried about it because I know you're Asian. But then I've been in classrooms where if you see a Black student, they'll make like, oh my God, he's gotta be an athlete. We're gonna turn him into an athlete, right? It even made movies about it. I think Blind Side was one of the movies. So just because you see a big Black kid, subconsciously think that person must be an athlete, or if he's not, I can turn him into an athlete. But we don't see so those unconscious biases work for and against in many different ways.
And I think it's interesting, the little sub-headline there where it says, findings could help explain why Black men are more likely to be shot by police. And I would say not only it leads to more school suspensions of Black boys, young men and boys, expulsions, police stops, arrests, prisons, shootings, and lack of employment. It's pervasive. So I think it's important to remember the impact that this bias has. Okay, so let's talk about microaggressions.
Yes, we're going to transition to microaggressions now. I see the chat room is blowing up. We have over 100 comments, and with some of the feedback we got from you all last week is that we like this to be more interactive, and we want to get more voices in. Some people say yes, but we only have an hour. Just give us the information. So we're going to reserve the last 10 minutes for all questions and comments, and we'll ask people to speak. So just jot your questions down. Hold on to them, because we know we have some good ones we want to hear from everyone. But now we're talking about what are microaggressions. Microaggressions are the everyday, not sometimes, not occasionally, the everyday verbal, nonverbal, and environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentional or unintentional. And they're usually felt by the marginalized group. And so, for example, if that definition is not clear enough for you, I experience, as many people do, tons of microaggressions every day. So one microaggression I would often get is, LeBron, you speak so well. I'm like, why shouldn't I speak well? I went to school like everybody else, you know? And so that's just an example of a microaggression. And so these things, they're really most identified by, unfortunately, the victim. Usually the person engaging the microaggression is usually not aware, because once again, it's connected to the unconscious bias. So they're not always aware of what they're doing. And so what Ann and I want to do is we want to provide some strategies. So we've talked about unconscious bias, we've defined microaggressions, but now we're going to talk about some strategies for how you combat microaggressions. And so the first thing to do is you have to inquire. So if you're a school leader or a teacher and you hear a colleague or someone engaging in microaggressions, usually unintentionally, we're going to have to lean into the discomfort, and we're going to have to address these situations. And so the first thing you can do is to inquire. And so Ann and I are going to engage in a little role play right now of what that could look like.
So LeBron, I'm having trouble with Jason. Do you think you could talk to him about it for me?
Sure, Ann, but my question is, Jason's not one of my students, so why would you want me to talk to Jason?
Well, I thought maybe you could relate to him better, since you're African American and so is he.
Yeah, well, that's great, but I think that Jason would relate better to a teacher that he already has a relationship with. You know, just because we're both African American doesn't mean that I can be able to help him with the problem. And in addition, I find it odd that, you know, they always have, whenever they have trouble with students of color, they direct them to me, but not when they need help academically. So do you find that odd, Ann?
Yes, I totally find it odd. So LeBron and I actually had a conversation about this, and we wanted to make it pretty evident that that's something that a teacher may say and not really realize it's a microaggression towards LeBron. Whereas if that teacher would have said, you know, I have a student who's really struggling with math, and I wonder if maybe you could support me or you could talk with him about something, that would not be considered a microaggression, because it's something that LeBron has that he brings that's a positive.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Ann. And so, like I said, this presentation will be made available. And so I really encourage everyone to look at these slides and to use these language stems as starters for how you engage with someone when you recognize microaggression. So we talked about inquire, and then preference statements. So you want to restate or help people to restate their statements in ways that are not considered to be microaggressions. Also, you want to ask people to reflect. To me, it appears that you believe such and such by what you said. So having that conversation, so you really don't want to be combative to someone, but you want to be inquisitive. You want to ask them to reflect. You may also want them to reframe. Can you please reframe how you stated that? Just like the example that Ann gave. Did Jason need math help, or did you want me to talk to Jason because he's also Black? And so framing is very, very important. And then also in terms of revisiting, you know, if a situation happens, you may not want to address it in the moment, but you may want to find another time when, you know, defenses are down for both people, and then to revisit. Like, do you remember our conversation when you mentioned X, Y, Z? So these are some strategies for helping people to address microaggressions.
So now we're going to have a quick short video clip of some students talking about microaggressions, hopefully. And as Lybroan is pulling up the technology here, I want you to just think about what resonates as you listen to these students' voices.
Here at UNT, I've heard, you're so pretty for a Black girl. I feel like it discounts me as a person, and then I feel like it discounts my race. I feel like you can be pretty just because you're a woman, or, you know, or all Black women are beautiful, all people of color are beautiful, just the same as people that are not people of color. So for them to make that specific statement, that's what I'm like, what in you made you say that to me? As if it were a compliment.
So another type of micro insult is when students in the classroom are dismissed or treated almost as if they're invisible. For instance, in some of our sciences or engineering classes, there are few women, and professors often don't call on those women.
I had one instance in a statistics-based class where we were discussing something bell curve related, and he presented a question, and I don't remember exactly what the answer was, but I answered it, and he kind of doubted me. And he very condescendingly was just like, oh, okay, well, I mean, like, this is the best answer, but I guess your answer could be right. You know what, we'll ask, it was a grad student. He was like, you know what, we'll ask Dr. So-and-so and see what he thinks the best answer is. And there was no apology or anything. He was just like, oh yeah, Dr. So-and-so said that, yeah, that was actually a really acceptable answer. And I was just like, okay. What else is he going to doubt me on, and when else am I going to be called out in front of 70 other people, you know, and have a weird exchange that makes the whole room quiet? Like,
One of my science classes, my teacher had asked what I wanted to do, and I told the teacher that I wanted to be a psychiatrist. And immediately they're like, that's too hard for you. Maybe you should try a different field, or have you ever thought about being a nurse practitioner? Nurse practitioners in psychiatry make pretty well, they make a lot of money too. Have you thought about that? Like, why go to med school?
Genuinely, sometimes somebody might feel like they can't make it, you know, and then when you continue to tell them that, it does hurt, you know.
I've had
So we'll just take a minute or so if anybody wants to share, raise their hand, and I don't know if Africa you're able to see. If anyone wants to share anything that resonated or reinforce some thinking.
Yes.
Oh, I see a hand here.
Okay.
Andrea, so I'll let Andrea talk.
Okay.
And Andrea, can you unmute your
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. I think one that resonated pretty personally with me is the last girl who became a little emotional when, you know, they were giving her the doubt of her actually going to med school. And because I work as a paraeducator, I'm also many times doubted, and I work in the field of math. So I'm always, woo woo, math. I'm always doubted on like your skill level and whether or not, and then I do also have a unique background where I'm finishing my master's in psychology. So she definitely resonated with me as far as like the sciences, the maths, and in a more male-dominated field where they will doubt not only because you're a female, but because you're a Black female. So I think that that definitely is something I could relate to.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I appreciate you sharing that.
No problem.
Totally. And I think what's important to remember when you think about this is that, and I've always, when I've been working with novice teachers and any teacher I've been mentoring, the power of your words, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
You have, often we just don't even think about it, how powerful the words of adults, respected adults, or adults in those situations of power. I think it's so critical that we remember that.
And I'll take one more, and then we'll get back. So looks like Dr. Henry. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Dr. Henry, and share. Go ahead, Dr. Henry. Okay, I guess we're able. Then we'll do his last one. Teresa, if you could unmute yourself and go ahead and talk.
Thank you for selecting me. I am Teresa Mendoza, and I am married to an African American. I have a child with disabilities, and I have children who came from Mexico, and then they did not speak the language. I learned how to speak English when I was 33. I mean, I went to school, and it was really hard for me to continue my education, especially like I wanted to become a teacher. So I did. I graduated with high honors at the university and also in college. And it was really hard for me, especially I had to learn another language and the concepts I did had them because I went to university in Mexico. But when I came to America, I discovered the America was full of discrimination and microaggressions and, you know, and how classism and all those things existed when I never knew it did. I recently graduated and got my master's as an administrator. And it's really hard for me to find a job, and not because I am not equipped. I mean, I'm very intelligent to myself, and I consider myself, because I'm bilingual, biliterate. And I have the opportunity to see so many things in the world, and I'm full of knowledge, and I work in a district where opportunities to minorities are not given. I have to kind of push myself through, and I went to apply for positions at the OSBI to kind of give me those opportunities. So as a Latina woman, it is even harder. And especially like I do have an accent, and a lot of people, they think because I'm bilingual, I am stupid, or they see that as a positive. And also, you know, I can relate to the aggressions of, oh, she has an accent, she might not be educated, or, you know. So the way that I talk also, it is a huge problem, especially like I am very direct, and in my culture, we talk straightforward. And in America, people do not like to speak, you know, like you have to go and think what you say, because people get so offended, and then people, you know, take things out of context. So there is a huge monster for us Latinos. I mean, you are in America. I mean, I came here and I was illegal, and a lot of my students are the same way. They're immigrants. They do not speak English. So you are able to express yourself and to fight for those rights. But families right now, they're struggling. And so I want to be a role model for them so that they can see themselves in me. So I was almost crying when I saw the video, so I had to share on my page. But thank you. This is, you're speaking my language. I mean, I know that I have to find allies, white allies that can go and fight the same fight and make a difference. But I wanted to say thank you for this. I mean, I need it.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. And do you want to respond? I have something to say, but do you want to respond to that, Ann?
I just appreciate hearing your voices and that this does resonate. And I know that you're speaking for a lot of people, Teresa. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing, and thank you, Ann, for finding that video, because it even though I was just like the third or fourth time I've watched it, I always feel it every time because I live that experience. And I'll just say quickly, as a math teacher, I would always make the young lady sit in the front row in my class, because I went to a workshop and I taught algebra 2 and pre-calculus. They said a lot of girls didn't do well in higher level math because the teachers would tend to coddle them. They're like, oh, I don't want you to work this hard. So they would give girls the answer. They wouldn't let them struggle. And so you have to struggle in order to do well in higher level math. And so when I heard that, I'm like, these teachers are doing harm to girls unintentionally. They think they're helping them, but they're really hurting them for the future. So I always put the girls in the front row of my class because I know I wanted them to be mathematicians. So I understand and can relate to what was said.
So we can talk a lot about what where the roots are of this. And I think right now, both Lybroan and I want to get into how do we get rid of these roots? How do we pull this up by the roots? And so we have a couple of strategies that we're going to be sharing. And the first group of strategies are strategies for everyone. So becoming more aware of when we find ourselves defaulting to bias. And I really appreciated Lybroan sharing the times he may have had biases, and we all have it. And I think that's humbling and also helps us to understand that we all are on a journey. And I think in particularly at this time, when becoming aware, when we're feeling stressed, when we're having to make rapid decisions, when maybe we don't have all the information, when we're making assumptions about students who don't show up on the Zoom, what information are we missing and how can we find out about it? And I think above all, and yesterday I actually was meeting with a group of teachers at an alternative high school in Watsonville, and they were having a community building staff circle. And I was so impressed by how creative the teachers were in working around and really becoming aware of what were some of the pieces of missing information they had.
Yes. And so a couple more strategies for overcoming bias in schools. Number one is increase your contact with the relevant group. So many times as a consultant, I go into schools and I recognize that the faculty does not live within a 10-mile radius of the school in which they teach. And so they drive in the morning, teach, and leave as soon as possible. And they have really a very limited connection with the community or the students or the culture. So that further perpetuates those unconscious biases and those microaggressions. So being able to spend time after school, go to the kids' basketball game or soccer game, or go to the corner store and hang out for a few minutes. And so the more you can invest in those groups, the more or less likely you are to have unconscious biases or to engage in microaggressions. And number two, a good strategy is to blind yourself. Not literally, not like Stevie Wonder, but when I say blind yourself, I mean that you want to remove opportunities for you to have bias. So if students are writing essays, rather than have them put their name on it, either cover the names or give them a number, so that as soon as you read the paper, you have to read the paper blind and not noticing the name, because you see that name. And I'm a teacher. I've taught for 15 years. I had all kind of biases. So as soon as I see a name, your paper is almost already graded as soon as I see your name. So in order to prevent those biases, think of ways you can blind yourself, or to pick sticks out when you're choosing students, or to make sure you rotate the class. So of course you're going to let the boys with the hood sit in the back and not pay attention to them, but then every 3 weeks switch them and put them in the front row. So you want to do things to help counteract biases. And the last one I'll say is to counteract stereotypes, that you make conscious decisions to do certain things. So if you have a class president or a classroom president, make sure you make that a student of color, or female. So make sure you be proactive in making sure you counter stereotypes. And when you go into the faculty lounge, go ahead and sit next to that Latina lady and have a conversation. Don't just stay with your normal comfort group. Step out of your comfort zone and have that conversation, because you may learn something and you'll be surprised how one conversation can debunk years and years of biases and unconscious thoughts that you had about a particular group or entity.
So this just, these are some specific strategies we wanted to share, and we know there's lots more, but this is focused on educational leaders. And I have to say, I think leaders in education are critical in disrupting this kind of microaggressions and unconscious bias. And one of the things is specifically hold professional development for all staff to learn about unconscious bias and microaggressions. And even if everybody's like, oh, we know this, I always think in terms of we're all on a journey. This is an equity journey. We can all learn more from each other as we go. I wanted to share that Glenn Singleton's protocol for courageous conversations about race has been one of the most valuable tools that I've used in the work that I've been doing around equity, because if you can't have those conversations in a way, and Lybroan referenced a little bit about not wanting to turn people off and having people become defensive, Glenn has amazing protocols that he uses that really do help people understand how to have productive conversations. If we aren't even having the conversations, we're not even going to get started. So we have to begin. The leader can spend time in staff meetings. Did you want to add something, Lybroan?
Yeah, I'm just going to say in terms of getting coaching for teachers. So for administrators and teachers, ask for coaching. So professional development is where it starts, but the coaching, having a coach, whether academic coach who's competent in cultural responsive teaching, social emotional learning, or developing a growth mindset. Because as a teacher, you go to the PD, that's great, but then you slide back into your old habits. But if you had a coach, they can help you work through that on a weekly basis, help you identify microaggressions or unconscious biases in your pedagogy or in your content that you choose.
And thank you, Lybroan. And I think that really harkens back to the leadership, that the leadership says, this is going to be a focus for our school. This is what we're going to have. There's going to be times when we're going to coach each other. And I also wanted to say, let's make sure that we invite students into the conversation and community leaders.
Yes, indeed. And thank you so much. And now we want to look at some strategies for teachers and paraeducators. First thing I want to say is that in my experience, that paraeducators experience microaggressions probably more than anyone else in the school setting. And oftentimes paraeducators are people of color, and they are in the classroom, but don't have the power and the authority of the teacher, but they usually build more relationship working one-on-one with the students and can be a great ally to the teacher and help the teacher create a better relationship with the students, and also help build the confidence of students. So paraeducators should be very mindful about the microaggressions and to be able to speak and share. And so that's why we want to make the invisible visible. You have to name it. So if you hear someone engage in a microaggression, you have to name that, say, you know what, that was a microaggression and here's why. Because even though we're the victims of microaggressions, we have to do the heavy lifting of explaining what has happened to us, and we have to say ouch. If we don't say ouch, they're gonna keep stepping on our feet. So we have to be aware of that. And so here are some more topics here. Like I said, we'll make this available, and really looking at bullet number 2, practice using a protocol. Here's the honest truth. You're not going to change people's belief systems overnight. So if you give them protocol and language stems, you can be a conscious teacher who has a high expectation for students, and you don't even have to believe it. I don't care if you believe kids can learn or not. You just have to teach like you believe kids can learn. You have to say good morning to a kid, even if you don't like them. You have to tell a kid, I believe you're a genius, even if you don't like it. You just have to say these things. You have to ask open-ended questions, whether you like it or not, because that is the only way we're going to get equity in education. We have to change the behavior. Just how we have scripted curriculum, we need to have scripted engagement or interactions, how teachers engage with students.
And I think also the last two bullets are so important, and that is bringing kids into it. I've had teachers say, oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they're going to be comfortable. And I'm like, if you don't think kids are talking about race and bias and microaggressions, you're naive, because that's what kids are talking about, and giving them a structured forum within their classroom where it's safe, where you've provided them some protocol and some guidelines of how to speak their truth, how to share, how to learn from one another and examine their own biases. That's a really, really critical piece. And not just, I think, as we're on Zoom, but as we have conversations with small groups of students, as we go back into a classroom environment.
Now we're talking about communicating with parents. So this is for teachers and administrators. In order to help overcome a lot of unconscious bias, we ask you to provide, to practice the 90-10 principle. That means when you're engaging with parents, let the parents talk 90% of the time, and you listen 90% of the time, and you only talk 10% of the time. Because in most cultures, they hold teachers and administrators to a high esteem. And a lot of times, especially parents of color, struggle in advocating for their students. And so if you, having that power as the teacher or the principal, spending more time listening to the parents, you can learn a lot more, and that information will help you better serve the students.
And parents. One of the things that we heard from Dr. Harper yesterday was really talking about advocacy around parent groups. Lybroan and I were talking a little bit about that first bullet. And Lybroan, do you want to share what you do at the beginning of the year for your sons?
Yes, what I do, I've learned after teaching in private schools for 15 years, I learned the power of the parent. And so I inform parents in public school that when the year starts, you tell the teacher, I'm a concerned and involved parent, whether that's in a conversation or an email, and say, I'm here to support you. My student wants to earn an A in your class. Please tell me the 3 or 4 things my child has to do to earn an A in your class. And me as the parent, I'll make sure they do those things. And so establishing a relationship and letting teachers know that you're a concerned and involved parent. Because if I get a classroom with 35 students, I'm going to pick my favorites, as all teachers do. But the ones who also become my favorite are the parents who are always in my ear. So if I know a parent is always looking at the lessons I give, the exams, if they're going to email me, then I make sure I look out for that student. And that's how you get a private school education in any school.
Okay, so we're going to move on now. And as Lybroan said, these are going to be things for you to reflect on. We want to give you a chance to think a little bit and to share with us. You can either share a time when you feel like somebody challenged a bias you had, and if it made you rethink it, how they might show up in your school, how we can bring our implicit biases to our consciousness, and how can we be sure that our biases don't become microaggressions. And I also think major, not micro, but macroaggressions as well. So we're going to give you a chance to think and share or offer questions. And yeah, Lybroan, you can see hands that go up.
Yes, I'll look for the hands going up. Let's see if anyone has anything they want to share or something they may want to have shared from some of the prior discussion. And I know we have a robust, oh, here we go. I see someone here. Okay. Same, I can't see.
Sametame?
Yes, there we go, yes.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to, you know, if you allow me to go back to a little bit of what we shared earlier, because this is really important to me, because as an African, Black and African with an accent, I find myself as double or triple minority because, first of all, I'm Black, a minority, plus I'm African with an accent. So that by itself is a lot of hurdles to jump. So when I first started teaching here in this country, because teaching is so different in Africa than here, in Africa, the teacher is like an authority. So you are there in society, you have the power, and parents know it. As a matter of fact, if a teacher whoops you up, gives you a mild corporal punishment at school, and you go home, you tell your parents, they beat you some more. Because
I think that's my family too.
Absolutely, you get beaten some more. So when I first came here, I entered the classroom and students were so difficult. I came back home and I told my wife, you know what? I can't teach here. I cannot. She told me, you know what? This is a challenge. You'll make it. Why don't you take it more seriously? So I started teaching. I started learning my craft and in terms of classroom management. And my first high school, what I taught, I was at LAUSD. My principal had told me, Mr. Tame, you're a very smart person, but you cannot teach these children. Well, that by itself encouraged me to say, no, you cannot decide on my path. I'm going to be a teacher in this country, and I'm going to be one of the best teachers. I will do the best I can. After I heard that, I went and enrolled in a master's program, dual program at National University. That's where I got my master's and my credentials. Then I started working in a major charter school in LA. And
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
What I love about your story is no matter what the obstacle was, you decided to leap over it and climb even higher. And I love that example that you share, and that we need to encourage others that you're going to face unconscious bias, you're going to face microaggressions, but you have to go above and beyond. So thank you very much for sharing that.
And that's the same thing I tell my students when they say, okay, well, when you share about.
And we'll take another, Mr. Bonner. Can you please unmute?
I'm unmuted now. I just want to tell a story about, I'm probably older than most of the people in the audience, but back in the 60s, my sister and I went to a high school with only 5 Black kids and 3,000 students. And my sister had a counselor who told her that Black girls don't go to college, and had put her into the home ec and the non-college prep set of courses. My dad wasn't at all pleased with that, and they did have a conversation between him and the counselor. And my sister went on to graduate from high school, graduated from UC Davis, and Hastings Law School. So I think both in terms of the bias and the parent advocates are lessons that I learned really well.
Thank you so much for sharing that story.
Thank you.
We'll take one more caller. I believe Dina Hernandez.
Hi. Oh,
hey, Dina.
I was at a CTA equity workshop, and one of the first things they had us do was talk about what we do when we don't teach. And I said how I was training for my first marathon and I love running, and I was with a bunch of people who love to run. And the thing I learned, I never thought about it. I run all over town, gone into Starbucks because I had to use the restrooms and never say anything. And to find out that my fellow runners of color don't always have that same experience. It's like, I was like, wow. I mean, I've been trained to watch for it in my district and when I'm teaching, but I was like, oh, I never thought about that. And it just made me more aware when I'm out running, just the different responses.
Thank you.
Thank you. And do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I just really appreciate people sharing their perspectives on these reflections. And I hope that everybody has a chance to read the chats, because the chats are so rich and full of other thoughts and reflections. So we're going to, it's getting towards that time, and we're going to offer a couple of resources. The first one, couple that really I've used a lot, and one is called a book called The Listening Leader, Creating Conditions for Equitable Transformation by Shane Safir. I really highly recommend that, Equitable School Transformation. And she actually goes out and works in schools, and she's been working in East Side Union in San Jose to help create equitable conditions. She has a great chapter on listening to parents. Her whole thing is listening. And the other one, of course, is my go-to, which is Courageous Conversations About Race, because if you can't have productive conversations around these things, then they're going to forever remain implicit. And
yes, and then
LeBron, you want to talk to the last one?
Yes, Project Implicit. If you click the link, or if you write down the link, like I said, this presentation will be made available. You'll be able to evaluate your own biases in several different areas. So it's a great tool to use. It's a great training tool with faculty, so that everyone can really understand their biases. So we all have them. So you first have to acknowledge that you do, and this test really helps you acknowledge your biases, or reveals them, and makes you more aware of yourself as you interact with other people.
And I just want to also say that any additional thoughts, suggestions, ideas, please put them in the chat box. I know that Africa is going to give you the link to give the feedback. I want to tell you that LeBron and I so appreciate your feedback. It just helps us so much. And we're doing 2 more of these, so stay tuned. Africa gave you the preview to the next one. And we're just so pleased and appreciative. It just reinforces my belief that teachers and educators all along the whole, everywhere, there's so much potential, and the future is in our hands. We just have a tremendous responsibility, along with what we've been asked to do. So I wanted to thank you, and I want to give the last minute for, and please fill out the feedback. That really is helpful. And the last slide is for LeBron.
Thank you, Ann. So I just want to thank everybody once again for attending this week. Ann and I hope you found it useful, and that you got a few nuggets out of this, and that you'll be able to identify your own unconscious biases, and to be able to identify them in others, and have some strategies to really address microaggressions. If you have any more questions or want more information, my email address and company website is posted here. I have a STEMulate learning company, so we do STEM education. We actually train teachers how to teach math to Black and brown students. And people say, well, why do you do that? Why do they gotta be Black and brown students? And it's exactly because of the conversation we're having today, because of the unconscious bias, because of the microaggressions. So learning math is really more steeped in self-esteem than it is in ability. And so microaggressions can really tear those down, unconscious biases, teachers not pushing you. And so we really help teachers to pull back the shade and allow students of color to shine in mathematics. So we want to thank you all once again. Ann and I look forward to our next session with everyone. And thank you so much, Africa, for hosting us. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Africa.
Oh, absolutely.
Everyone can please fill out the surveys. I'll let you have the last word.
Yeah, well, thank you both so much, and thank you to all the participants for this really engaging space to be able to grapple with this together. And there's a lot, like I've been learning about this for a while now, but I feel like I'm always learning something new. So thank you so much for deepening my understanding. And I'm sure that based on the chat too, lots of people felt that way. I'm about to drop the link for the additional resources, and I've seen the question many times in the chat. What'll happen at that on the website is when you go there, when the slide deck is available, there's a like when you look at this, the description of this session, the additional resources tab will be there. Once you click on it, you'll be able to see the recording. You'll be able to see the slides once they're available. And the link that I have for the survey, I think is not the right link for today. So what I'm gonna do is I definitely wanna let you know that the link for the survey for today will also be available on the website, because I don't wanna send you the wrong link. But I'm gonna go ahead and drop that in the chat right now. You should see Equitable Learning in Crisis Extended Session, the website, and you'll be able to see everything there. Not only will you have the resources available and the resources available in the survey, but you'll also have a tab where you'll get to share some follow-up questions. So some of you have the opportunity to share your questions today, which we're so grateful for. If you have a question that is remaining with you, or that comes up for you after today's session, you'll be able to go into the website and to share your question, with the follow-up question tab. And I'll be hosting quite a few of these, so hopefully I'll see you again. I'll see the both of you again, and I'll see some of the participants again as well. And I hope everyone has an amazing rest of the day.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
Blessings.
Bye.